in the farthest corner of Fort Campbell's military airfield, away from the noise of active helicopters, away from the smell of fuel, and far from anyone's interest, an old UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter sat in silence. Its paint had faded to a dull, lifeless gray. The rotor blades were cracked. The wiring had been scavenged for usable pieces. Even the logbook attached to its frame carried a red sticker. Not mission capable. Permanent. The mechanics didn't call it a helicopter anymore. They called it a corpse. A dead bird. Something that once had purpose, but now existed only as a reminder of what used to fly. Some soldiers joked that it had more dust than metal left inside it. Some said it would never touch the sky again, but none of them expected that the most unlikely person in the unit, a young woman named Staff Sergeant Elena Rivera, would ever dare to challenge that belief. Elena arrived from Fort Drum during a routine reshuffling of aviation personnel. She was small, almost fragile in appearance, with hair always tied in a clean, tight bun. She didn't walk like someone trying to prove anything. She walked like someone who carried her own quiet world inside her. A world made of discipline, focus, and a strange kind of hope. Most soldiers didn't notice her at first. To them, she was just another mechanic in uniform. But the commanding officer, Captain Harris, had a habit of testing new arrivals, and that's when he assigned her the job that everyone else avoided. He walked her across the hangar, past the working helicopters, past the noisy mechanic bays, and finally stopped in front of the dead Black Hawk. "This one is yours," he said in a tone that carried both sarcasm and warning. "You can study it, strip it, or stare at it, but you're not expected to bring it back." No one could. Mechanics standing nearby smirked. Someone whispered, "Good luck, rookie. That thing is older than half of us." Another added, "She'll give up in a week." But Elena didn't reply to them. She didn't frown or shrink. She simply nodded and placed her hand gently on the helicopter's cold metal surface, as if she were greeting an old friend. She whispered internally, not to the captain, not to the mechanics, but to herself, "If you ever flew once, you can fly again." It wasn't a challenge. It was a promise. She started on day one with inspection. Not a quick glance, not a checklist run, a true examination. She spent hours crawling beneath the fuselage, measuring corrosion depth, checking structural integrity. By the end of the first week, she discovered that the helicopter wasn't dead because it was impossible to restore. It was dead because no one had the heart to care about it. Soldiers had taken parts from it because it was easier than ordering new ones. Old repairs were rushed and incomplete. Systems were left half-assembled. No one had wanted to give time to something they thought had no future. The more she studied it, the more she felt a connection to the machine. It wasn't just metal and wires. It was a story. A story everyone had abandoned. From that moment on, she made the hangar her world. Before sunrise, when the airfield still slept, she unlocked the bay and turned on the lights. After sunset, when the rest of the mechanics went home, she stayed behind. Some nights she worked until her fingers grew numb from metal tools, until her eyes stung from hydraulic fumes, and until the silence of the empty hangar became so loud she could feel her own heartbeat echo inside it. But she didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She didn't complain. She studied manuals older than her. She requested technical drawings that had been forgotten for years. She contacted retired aviation engineers who had once worked on the helicopter model. She rebuilt one system at a time: gearbox, tail rotor assembly, hydraulic lines, and avionics rewiring. Her hands often bled from sharp edges. Her uniform sleeves were permanently stained with grease. She slept less, worked more, and yet every single morning she arrived with that same quiet fire in her eyes. At first, people laughed at her. They passed by and said things like, "Still working on that fossil?" Or, "You know they only gave you that job so you'd fail, right?" But Elena didn't give their words a home in her mind. She had seen failure before. In her own life, in her own struggles, in moments when she had been told she didn't deserve to be in a male-dominated field. She had fought to earn her place in the Army Aviation branch, and she wasn't about to let a dusty, broken helicopter defeat her. As weeks turned into months, something strange began to happen. The laughter slowly faded. The whispers changed in tone. Mechanics who had once mocked her now paused when walking by, watching silently as she worked. Some even offered small helps: a tool, a manual, a flashlight, though they tried to make it look casual. The commanding officer, who had never expected anything from her, began visiting the hangar more often, pretending he was just checking inventory, but deep inside, he was curious. Something about the way she worked demanded attention. One night, she was working on the avionics wiring system long after everyone else had left. The wiring was old, brittle, and mismatched from years of patchwork repairs. She spent 3 hours tracing a single wire, only to find it had been cut and twisted into the wrong connector. She sat on the metal floor, her back aching, her hands trembling from exhaustion. For the first time in weeks, she felt a moment of helplessness. She rested her forehead against the cold metal and sighed. The hangar was dark except for her toolbox light. The world outside seemed so far away. She could have walked out. She could have told the captain the aircraft was truly dead. But she didn't. Instead, she closed her eyes and reminded herself why she had started. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anyone wrong, but because deep inside she believed abandoned things deserved a second chance. The next morning she arrived earlier than usual. She rewired the entire avionics system from scratch. It took her 4 days. 4 days of relentless focus, skipping lunch, drinking water only when she remembered, and sleeping for 3 hours at night. But when she finished, the system test light flickered green for the first time in years. She smiled, not widely, not dramatically, but with a quiet satisfaction that only someone who had poured their soul into something would understand. Word spread through the unit that she was making progress. People doubted, but curiosity grew. Eventually, the day came when she believed the aircraft was ready for an engine test. She went to Captain Harris's office, knocked on the door, and simply said, "Sir, the Black Hawk is ready for ignition." He stared at her for several seconds, as if trying to read whether she was joking. When he realized she wasn't, his eyebrows lifted slightly. The first sign of genuine surprise he had ever shown her. They moved the aircraft out of the hangar. The sun was sharp that morning, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Mechanics gathered around, pretending they just happened to be nearby. Pilots stood at a distance with their arms folded, watching like skeptics waiting to witness failure. Elena climbed into the cockpit. Her heart beat heavily in her chest, but her hands were steady. She had rebuilt every inch of that machine. She knew its heartbeat better than anyone. She flicked the master switch. Silence filled the air. She breathed in, then pressed the ignition. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. A cough, a sputter, and another cough. The mechanics exchanged smirks. Someone murmured, "Told you." But Elena didn't react. She adjusted the fuel mix just slightly. A tiny correction only someone who had studied the aircraft so intimately would understand. Then the impossible happened. The engine roared to life. The rotors began to turn slowly, then faster, slicing the air with power. Dust lifted from the ground. The helicopter vibrated with the energy of awakening. People froze. Their sarcasm evaporated. The hangar crew stared in disbelief. The dead bird was alive. No one spoke for a full minute. Captain Harris finally whispered, "I can't believe it." But Elena believed. She had always believed. And now the entire unit could see what belief looked like when backed by relentless work. 2 days later, a test flight was scheduled. The pilot assigned for the test flight hesitated. He approached Elena and said, "I can't let you fly with me. Not after all these years of this bird being grounded. If something fails." Elena cut him off gently but firmly. "If it wasn't safe, I wouldn't let it leave the ground." Her voice held a calm confidence he couldn't argue with. He looked at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right, strap in." She sat in the co-pilot seat as the engine powered up. The helicopter rose into the air, not shaking, not struggling, but steady, powerful, confident. Elena felt a lump in her throat as she saw the ground fall away beneath her. The machine she had poured her strength into was finally doing what it was born to do. They completed a 22-minute flight pattern with no issues. When they landed, the entire unit was waiting. No one laughed now. No one doubted. No one questioned. Instead, they watched Elena step out of the cockpit, her boots touching the ground like a quiet victory drum. Captain Harris approached her slowly, looked at the helicopter, then at her, and said something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Sergeant Rivera, you did what an entire team said was impossible." Not long after, she received a formal Army recommendation for her exceptional contribution. A recognition rarely given to a single mechanic. Her name was placed on the unit board, not as the woman who rebuilt a helicopter, but as the one who reminded the entire unit that determination is stronger than limitations. But the true reward wasn't the certificate, the salute, or the applause. It was the moment she stood alone in the hangar again, looking at the aircraft she had brought back from death. She touched the metal gently and whispered, "You flew again." And somewhere deep inside her, she felt like she had flown too. Not on rotor blades, but on unwavering courage. Her story became a quiet legend across bases. The woman who refused to quit, the mechanic who resurrected a machine everyone had given up on, the soldier who proved that impossible is only a word until someone decides to challenge it. And every time new soldiers arrived at Fort Campbell, they heard the same sentence spoken with respect. She didn't just rebuild a helicopter, she rebuilt belief. That is the woman, that is her story. And that is the reminder she left behind. That sometimes the thing everyone abandons becomes the thing that defines the person brave enough to try.